Very pleased to have on the talk show again Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Good morning, Jeff.
Thank you. Dobrý den.
Dobry then. I'm sure all the audience knows pretty well whom you are, but let me remind that you are a professor of economics and also an advisor, one of the key advisors of the Secretary General of the UN. And traveling like hell. I mean, in this position, meeting leaders of different countries across the globe, which should enrich you by many new information and let's say facts and so on. And you use it in a very productive way. In our first talk show, which was almost 1 year ago, you reminded the whole series of Western promises to Russia, which were not honored, starting from those addressed already to Gorbachev, and you had been advising to, up to the Minsk agreements in 2014 and 2015, and also Istanbul formula from the spring of 2022, reverted by Boris Johnson. How do you see the chance to restore equal and inseparable security architecture nowadays?
We're still in a period of great danger and disagreement. Uh, Trump has changed matters in the U.S. to an extent. Biden was very Russophobic and indeed looked forward to the war in Ukraine, I would say. Trump is, I think, trying to end the war in Ukraine, but his own team is divided between hardliners and those who would find a mutual agreement with Russia. So there's division even within Trump's team. There's division within Europe. There's a lot of confusion, I would say, about what to do. Um, in my own view, it shouldn't be so confusing. Uh, the U.S. Actually should understand that an agreement was already reached between Ukraine and Russia in April 2022, which you alluded to, the so-called Istanbul process. That agreement spelled out the way that this war should have ended back then, 3 years ago. It could still be the basis for ending the war today. So it's not so confusing, except our politics are confusing. Europe is still filled with warmongers. The US is divided right now between negotiators and warmongers, and we therefore have the war continuing.
Uh, what is the genuine motivations of your new president of the US? Could you somehow try to analyze the structure of his goals vis-a-vis Russia, vis-a-vis China, and let's say the outside world?
Well, of course, I don't think that he is the most coherent thinker in the world, so I don't want to put on too much structure on all of this. But he believes in America first, and he does believe in America as greatest. So he's not really a multilateralist or someone who wants a global order based on rule of law. He wants American sovereignty, they call it, the right to do whatever they want. But he has elements of pragmatism and realism as well. He knows that the United States shouldn't go to war with Russia. I think he knows the United States shouldn't go to war with China. At least I hope so. So these are glimpses of realism. American leadership is filled with unrealism, we have to understand. It's filled with a profound arrogance that developed already 80 years ago at the end of World War II, and that really went into hyperactivity in 1991 with the end of the Soviet Union. So there's an arrogant view within America that America should dominate the world and can beat back China, can beat back Russia. and should try to do so one way or another. Where Trump fits in this is ambiguous because it's pretty clear he would like some kind of working relationship with Russia. On the other hand, there's a lot of anti-China sentiment in the United States, including with Trump. The trade war is not an innocent matter. It aims to do damage to China, significant damage. And that's not a friendly act between superpowers. So this is a dangerous world. And Trump himself is confused and confusing, changing his mind hour to hour, reversing measures. It's an amateurism also that's quite extraordinary because nothing is really well prepared. There's not a deep strategy under all of this. There is a whim, the social media, the political cycle, a lot of improvisation, uh, and I think a lot of misconception. So it's a very confusing time.
But still, some people are dreaming about some sort of a, let's call it the Yalta 2.0. Is there a chance to reach some sort of compromise of that kind?
Well, it's interesting that you say some people are dreaming of it. You know, Yalta is in the American political lexicon a bad word.
Mhm.
It means that Roosevelt gave up to Stalin.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the neocons in the United States and the deep state say our biggest risk is another Yalta. And so they're fighting against any kind of agreement with President Putin, any kind of normalization of relations.
Mhm.
Remember, the arrogance of the United States is that the US should be number one. And the view, if you take that, is we should do anything we need to do to remain number one. And another dimension of this arrogance is treaties are weakness, negotiations are weakness.
Uh-huh.
If you negotiate, you're appeasing the other side. Of course, a key idea in history of Czechoslovakia, Munich 1938, that's probably the number one metaphor used in American foreign policy for at least 80 years. Never negotiate with the other side because if you do, it's appeasement. So this is what's happening right now. Trump opened negotiations with Russia. I'm all in favor of that myself. This is the right way to go. This should end the war. But first of all, inside the United States, it's clear that many of Trump's own advisors were against this. This is one point. Second, as soon as Trump opened negotiations, European leaders started to complain. Starmer in UK, Macron in France, Merz now in Germany. Oh, uh, you're going to do great damage to our security. We need to fight on. The British are, in my mind, completely insufferable. Uh, they cheerlead for war nonstop throughout their modern history. That's also a reflection of their imperial arrogance that goes back 2 centuries. Uh, France, oh my God, just inconsistent all the time, but with enough warmongering that we don't get peace. And Germany is hyper confused politically and very confused because it's been subordinate to the United States for decades after World War II. And on the other hand, uh, there is a as with Schultz and now with the Merz, there's a lot of war talk and all very dangerous for Europe. So this is not where it should be in April 2025, several months after Trump came into office promising to end the war. Trump is not decisive. He changes views by the day, by the hour. He's got a divided team. Uh, there are a lot of hardliners still in the US. They're hearing a lot from Europe. I would say the US deep state, meaning the CIA, the Pentagon, the Armed Services Committees in Congress, the military contractors, they remain what they are, basically hardliners. And a president has to be quite clear, strong, and consequent in order to override this warmongering. And we don't know whether Trump is that or not.
Will he be compelled to a certain extent to go a more constructive way due to the economic troubles he's facing of the country?
Yeah, this is a very important point, which is that the one thing that I think is pretty sure, though nothing is totally sure these days, is that Trump will not go back to the US Congress to say, vote more money for the war in Ukraine. That would be a significant political defeat for Trump, and it would basically kill his economic program, which is tax cuts, mainly for the rich. So if he went back to ask for more money for Ukraine, that would be a major reversal. Now, this brings an interesting question. Ukraine does not have the U.S. actual financial and military support going forward. It's not likely to under almost any circumstances, except in some bizarre case that Ukraine says, okay, you can take all our minerals, all our wealth, and Trump says, oh, we've got a great deal, we'll continue supplying arms. I wouldn't rule that out because the US can be just as crude as that, pure imperialism. But most likely, there will not be continued financing from the US. Then comes the question, what then? Europe cannot really make up the difference. It's a sheer matter of physical constraint as well as European financial constraints as well. So, and Zelensky, who is a kind of dictator right now, he rules by martial law, one person rule, very irrational and stupid in my mind, I have to say, because his country's getting destroyed and he doesn't seem to have any idea at all about what to do. But they won't have the US support. Europe won't make up the difference. Russia is going to continue to fight. So what would that mean? Well, if there isn't a peace agreement, it means that Ukraine will be militarily defeated, period. That's the most likely scenario if there's no peace agreement. Ukraine would be just completely idiotic not to try to find a peace agreement because otherwise they'll lose the whole country. But given the behavior of this political group in Ukraine, it's not impossible that they continue to try to grab people off the streets and send them to the front lines and reject any compromise until they're actually physically defeated. So that's one of the paths that is also a possibility right now.
How would you see within this context, but not only, the future of the US and European vis-a-vis Europe relations? I mean, which are worsening now and worsening in several very bad and dangerous directions, I would say.
Yes, I don't think there will be good relations between the US and Europe again, like there were after World War II. It could be better than now. Trump has no interest in Europe, and he's told by his advisors, dump Europe because your real war is with China. And so there's a certain attitude among Trump's team that Europe is just a weight around America's neck, and so don't pay any attention. But in general, the US is not what it was in relative power or technology or financial terms, even 20 years ago, much less 50 years ago. So the idea that the US is the bulwark of European security is gone. It's over. Uh, uh, and Europe, of course, is starting to understand this, not necessarily in the most intelligent way, I have to say, more in a kind of panicked way. If European leaders were smart, they would absolutely open negotiations with Russia to
Exactly.
say, look, we need a security arrangement. We need to return to the concepts of collective security. This
Exactly.
is obvious what Europe should do, but European leaders, I don't know if they're competent enough. Van der Leyen and certainly Starmer is I don't know. He doesn't seem to have even the word diplomacy. Macron doesn't have the word diplomacy. So this is really, and Merz talks about war with the with Russia and the need to send Taurus missiles. So Europe is more in in a psychological state of fear and reaction rather than a rational state of deciding what to do in view of the changing geopolitics. What Europe should do is to say, we are $20 trillion economy. We're strong. We have actually a nuclear deterrent in France and Britain. Russia's not going to invade Europe. This is just one of the stupidest things that's said every day.
Exactly.
Rather, we should have diplomacy. Uh, I said to European leaders, they obviously didn't want to hear from me and they didn't listen, but I said to them, don't go to Kiev for the 100th time. Go to Moscow.
Exactly.
Talk with your counterpart. Invite President Putin to Europe. Discuss matters. But they
That's
can't seem even to have that idea right now. It's really disturbing.
exactly. A broad Czech audience has been sincerely appreciating also your clear-cut, I would say courageous position to the Israeli cruel policies toward Palestinians. What is your forecast of further developments of this painful issue?
This is also, like the case of Ukraine, straightforward at the core, but seemingly impossible to get politicians to do the straightforward thing.
Mm,
So, in the case of Ukraine, the straightforward thing was don't expand NATO to Ukraine and we won't have a war, okay?
mm,
In the case of the Middle East, it is have a state of Palestine alongside the state of Israel. And then, as the Arab countries have said since 2002, every year, then we can have peace and normalization. But the problem is that the extremist government in Israel doesn't want peace. It wants domination. They're crazy. Netanyahu's a war criminal, in my view, out and out. And there's an ideology. It's got a mix of religious fervor on the one side, although many Jews hate Netanyahu. But in any event, it's got a religious fervor among extremist nationalists,
mm,
and it's got a supposed security rationale. Netanyahu's aim in life is to prevent a Palestinian state and to do it to get the United States to launch wars throughout the Middle East to defeat anyone that would support the Palestinians.
mm,
And now he's trying to get the United States to go to war with Iran. Just today in the New York Times, there's a story explaining that Netanyahu wanted to bomb Iran, wanted US approval. Part of Trump's team said, yes, let's go ahead. Part said no. And the president, again, has kind of split the difference for the moment, said, well, we're going to put it off for the moment and talk with the Iranians. The Iranians are saying, yeah, we can talk, but talk under the threat of being attacked. Come on. This is not how to have negotiations. And what Netanyahu, who's really a terrible person, sorry, and he's destroying Israel, and he is destroying the Middle East. What he's saying is, yes, what Iran must do is completely disarm, not only the nuclear, everything. Why? So that Israel can attack it, bomb it to smithereens. Even Netanyahu refers to the so-called Libyan solution for the nuclear, which was Gaddafi gave up the nuclear weapons and then NATO killed him. So, what kind of solution is that? What do you tell the Iranian side? Yeah, follow the lesson of Libya. The lesson of Libya is if you disarm, we will kill you. So this is where we are again in the Middle East. It's one act by the United States that could bring about peace. It's actually true. The United States just needs to say, we recognize the state of Palestine as the 194th UN member state. We drop our veto as the only vetoing country in the UN against Palestinian statehood and UN membership. And then the Arab countries will say, you know what? On this basis, a state of Palestine and a state of Israel, we can go forward with disarming the resistance groups, with ending the violence, with supporting reconstruction, with supporting Israel's security, with normalizing relations with Israel. The problem is Israel doesn't want to say yes, because that would mean giving up Israel's, and it's not Israel's, it's this extremist group of this extremist Zionism. We don't want to give up limits on where Israel rules. We want to rule all of Israel. We want to rule Gaza. We want to rule the West Bank. We want to rule East Jerusalem. And they say we want to rule parts of Beirut, parts of Lebanon, parts of Syria. Where's the limit? There is no limit. And so this is really the problem. And then you ask, well, where does the U.S. stand on this? Divided, because we have a very powerful Israel lobby, which is partly backed by some Jewish supporters of Israel and by a very hefty dose of evangelical Protestant supporters. In fact, it may be even more Christian than Jewish in its orientation, but it's a kind of evangelical Protestant Zionism, which actually has its roots in the last 2 centuries. And America, again, you need a president who understands, is clear, coherent, and we don't know whether Trump can understand this or find his way to do this, or whether he's just going to do what all the other American presidents have done, and that is take orders from Bibi Netanyahu.
That's true. You already spoke about the crazy policies of tariff games and trade wars and so on. On the other hand, the troubles which the new administration inherited are tremendous. What alternatives does Donald Trump beyond that scenario? And does your country have a realistic chance at the end to revert its deindustrialization?
Yeah, first of all, there isn't really deindustrialization in the United States. I just looked at the share of manufacturing in output since 1997, so almost 30 years. It was 11% of GDP in 1997, and it's 10.5% today, barely a change. So what has happened is the jobs have gone down a lot in manufacturing. They went from around 19 million in manufacturing in 1979 to about 17 million people in 2000 to about 13 million today. So what's happened is not actually that industry isn't in the US, it's that the jobs in industry have gone down a lot. Why? Well, if you go to a factory, as I do very often as an economist, you see a lot of robots. You see a lot of self-driving vehicles bringing parts to different places on the assembly line, and you see a lot of robots moving their robotic arms, assembling automobiles or other assembling smartphones, which I just watched in China recently. This is manufacturing now. Manufacturing is not where employment is because it has been automated. And the automation is absolutely going to increase with AI and with the humanoid robots. So there's a basic confusion anyway. America produces a lot of manufactured goods, but it puts the very labor-intensive, low-wage parts elsewhere because Americans earn higher wages in other activities, and so they don't want to do the putting in the little pieces on an assembly line, which is done in a labor-intensive way in a low-wage country. And then for the rest of the employment in manufacturing, sorry, robots are better at the assembly line than people. They work 24/7. They don't get tired. You don't
They
have
don't
to
have
feed.
trade unions.
They don't go on strike, and you don't have to feed them except for
Yes.
electricity generally. So this is the truth. So Trump has all sorts of mixed up ideas. Tariffs are good for revenue. Tariffs are good to punish China. Tariffs are good to close the trade deficit. Tariffs are good to bring back jobs. All of it is so naive, so unprofessional, so underanalyzed. And so, in the midst of all of this, come these wild decrees where they make up numbers. And then the president signs something that says, by the powers invested in me as president of the United States, I hereby declare an emergency under such and such act. And now I therefore put on tariffs. You can't make this stuff up. This is like a board game, a video game. This is not like a real government. Real government, you would think someone would plan things. There would be debate. There would be discussion. There would be analysis. None of that happened in this case. Nobody knew what the tariffs were going to be the day before. And then the U.S. trade representative wrote an absolutely stupid paper, a couple of pages of methodology that were nonsense. You wouldn't give a passing grade in a basic trade economics class. And that became our policy for about 2 days. Then the financial markets panicked. Then Trump reversed himself and said it's being postponed. So this is just government as improvisation with the one person that spends the day half on social media and half making executive decrees like a king. And it's a strange way to run a country of 335 million people and a $30 trillion economy, but it's not going to produce any good results.
Okay, we are pushed here in Europe under two Damocles swords. One is these destructive trade wars and at the same time crazy militarization of our economy. It's really a deadlock. What would be your advice, your, I don't know how to call it, yes, advice? How can we leave this very stupid, dangerous, vicious circle?
Yes, Europe lacks a strategy. The European Commission president, Ursula von der Leyen, was not a success in the first term. She led Europe into a war and into sanction regimes that have done great damage to the European economy, basically have broken apart the European economy. And on the basis of that record, she got a second term. You know, this is pretty strange. This is a problem. Europe needs a coherent strategy. It can't just be dictated by a Brussels group that has no apparent insight, no apparent strategy, and no success record, I have to say. So
Mm.
Europe needs an
That's
economic strategy. It does need a security strategy. It absolutely needs a diplomatic strategy. A diplomatic strategy is not that the high representative of Europe spend her time in Russophobic attacks. Uh, this is not diplomacy. Diplomacy would be that Callas, essentially the external affairs vice president, meet with
mm,
Lavrov. That's diplomacy. Talk, meet,
exactly.
discuss, come up with a way forward. This is precisely what Europe
Exactly.
refuses to do. And this is a pretty serious problem right now. Macron is without any support domestically. The most popular
Mhm.
politician in the country has just been ruled out of running for office, a kind of lawfare, in my
Yeah.
view, because I don't believe in that
Mhm.
approach,
Mhm.
that you tell who can run and who can't run in politics. This
Exactly.
is destroying the fabric of what we consider to be representative parliamentary democracy. So uh,
Mhm.
Mertz's party is overshadowed by a party, AFD, which no other parties will discuss with.
Mhm.
And the coalition
Mhm.
that is in place is a coalition of stasis, uh, not a new orientation or solution um, for Germany without taking lessons of the last few years.
Mhm.
So it's I don't have any immediate answers. Certainly, what I believe is Europe in our world today should act in a united way. Now, even that's unpopular because if you say Brussels has failed so much, why do we want more Brussels, not less Brussels? Okay, I want smart policies, not dumb policies. But I do think that with the United States threatening to invade Europe, and it is threatening to invade Greenland, have no doubt about it. And if you consider Greenland part of Europe, which I do, I would take that very seriously, actually, because
Mhm.
it's going to happen most likely.
Mhm.
With the U.S. Threatening war with China, Europe needs a coherent approach. Europe needs a coherent approach with Russia. Europe needs a coherent economic approach because basically the United States, on the one
Exactly.
side, took away all of the innovative companies. It put them essentially under U.S. policy control, say the Dutch lithography company, ASML. It's run like an American company, not like a European company.
Mhm.
It's subject to American decision making, not
Mhm.
European decision making. So that's one thing that happened. And the other thing that happened is that Europe prospers actually when it trades with Russia. And all of those linkages were broken at the behest of the United States, actually. Europe couldn't even figure out that the US blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Of course it did. It said it would for years. And then it did. And then European leaders either pretended or couldn't figure out the obvious. So all of this is to say Europe needs it needs a diplomatic strategy. It needs a security strategy. It needs an economic strategy. And it doesn't have any of those right now. And it needs some coherent uh, capacity to find a solution. By the way, Mario Draghi wrote I think, a sensible document, and it was dismissed
Mhm.
in a day. We don't hear about the Draghi report. Okay, there were things one could debate, but it should have been debated as the one thing that was put on the table. And now Europe could have a debate about economic strategy, but it didn't. And it doesn't really have a debate about security strategy right now, other than van der Leyen saying $800 billion for remilitarization, as if this is some great answer without a word about diplomacy. What are we remilitarizing for? For war or for diplomacy? For deterrence? None of this is even addressed right now.
Exactly. Jeff, you do belong to those US intellectuals who have the courage to imagine a much more secure or safe, prosperous, and just globe. And there are such people also in the Czech Republic and in the countries around us. What would be your idea, your advice, your, I don't know, yes, idea, so that our voices are much more, let's say, or our initiatives are much more visible, stronger? How can we, let's say, work together more than it is happening so far?
Thank you very much for that question. I travel all over the world as part of my UN work, as you noted. The attitudes are very different in developing countries, by the way. They see big opportunities for advancement right now. China, India, Southeast Asia, Africa. They say, depending on which of those one is talking about and their history, they're saying we have a chance really to leapfrog or to catch up. We can make some advances. We also recognize terrible threats like the climate crisis and so forth. We want to work together with other countries. So I find a tremendous amount of constructive thought around the world. Whereas in the US, I find no thought right now in Washington, although there is some thought around the country. And in Europe, I find mostly fear and reaction at the political level, although Europe is filled with intellectuals and great universities and so forth. But at the political level, they don't even want to talk right now. They're afraid of talking. They're just closed in and warmongering. So, and as an economist, I have to say, there's also one other point to mention, which is that we're in a technological cornucopia right now. Of course, the advances in AI, everybody sees. The advances in digital economy, everybody understands. We're having advances all over the economic spheres, in production and technologies, in green economy and other things. So the basic point that I have all along is we're not in a struggle with China. We're not in a struggle with Russia. We need to avoid self-destruction as a species. That's the number one. We need to avoid really stupid things. We need to tone down the hate speech because that's not conducive to anything we want. We need more diplomacy, but we shouldn't be panicking. Quite the opposite. We should be saying, whoa, look at the wonderful things we could do. We could get every kid in school. We could have healthcare with monitoring, even where there are no doctors right now. We could increase agricultural productivity so that hunger crises. This is not a moment of pessimism from the point of view of what we can do. So my basic point is we need a global dialogue of intellectuals and of scientists and thinkers who, first of all, intuitively understand we're not one against the other. This kind of warmongering is primitive and it needs to end. That's number one. Number two, this is a world of regions that need to be together, need to be talking together. We need Chinese, Indonesians, Malaysians, Indians, Europeans, Americans, Brazilians, Mexicans around the table. It's quite Africans. It's exciting when you do that. So I'm trying to find venues and ways to get truly the global discussion happening. And I love Zoom for that reason. I love the digital world because we can do that at very low cost, know each other, and understand we're not alone in this. And, you know, it is true. Philosophers have complained about politicians going back to Socrates and Plato. This is a long story that politicians are never really satisfactory. They're always thinking about war. They're always destroying their countries. They're always doing terrible things. And philosophers from Confucius, Socrates, Plato onward have been saying, come on, would you think? Would you get your act together? Would you stop this stupidity? We don't need to be governed by the least common denominator. We can actually put some clever ideas together. So that's my basic point, which is we need a worldwide movement, which would be very hard, but for the fact that we're all online together. We need to be speaking in new ways, and we need to be saying to our politicians, come on, stop already. We don't need 19th century ideas resurrected that ended up in war. We don't need NATO. By the way, we don't need all of these contraptions of a different era. We need to understand that the basic goal everywhere is security. So we need collective security. And we need the basic goal is human well-being and prosperity. So we need to talk realistically about how to deploy these new technologies for human benefit and to do that in a cooperative manner. So that's, not exactly a program of action, but it's the basic direction that I think is needed. When I am in a room and there's nobody from Asia, for example, or nobody from Africa, I think this room can't quite get the real world as it is right now. We need actually this kind of multilateral, multipolar world, and to tell our politicians, you can't just be America first, or you can't be, you're just not allowed to say Denmark or Greenland, that's mine, or Panama, that's mine. We need to get the politicians to understand, look, behave, help your country to do better, but stop the wars, the warmongering, the stupidities, the nastiness that's going to get us all killed if we don't choose a different course.
It sounds extremely promising. Look, this online community of enlightened intellectuals and other personalities, I think would multiply the strength, the power of our efforts. You promised to be with your wife in Prague in October, perhaps this
Yes?
year. I hope, Jeff, that till that time, this idea would get more concrete. I
Wonderful. We'll
promise,
work on it together.
exactly. I promise to you to get together the very representative community of enlightened intellectuals of the Czech Republic. They will be extremely pleased to meet you. And I hope whenever you are in Prague, we can move forward in concretizing and materializing the idea which you brought today. I like it very much.
Excellent. We'll do that. That sounds great.
Okay, I'm torturing you almost 1 hour. Thanks a lot for that. You gave us such a long time for this talk show. I believe we would have one more before, at least one more before you come to Prague in
Wonderful.
October. And in October, you would sit around one table and make a talk show, let's say, face to face, not only through Zooms.
It's a deal.
Thanks a lot.
Sounds great.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice day in Rome.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.